What's up, ladies and gentlemen of the internet? It's your boy, Jack Slack, coming at you on Wednesday the 18th of July. Fights Gone By, episode 90. We're creeping towards the big 100. I'll think of something special to do for that. And we're in a week wherein we are sandwiched between two events, but they are two very meh sort of events. Events that are just sort of like a very faint pulse of life in the MMA community. However, we have had the World Cup going on at the same time, which England crashed out of in emphatic fashion after I said what a wonderful time I was having getting drunk after all the games, last week at least. But we had that event headlined by Blagoy Ivanov, which is indicative of what a weak event it was. And then we got this Hamburg event coming up this weekend. Yeah. Oh, and there was a couple of Bellator events the other night too. Not really going to touch on that too much, except that maybe talk about Julia Budd, though the fight was fairly boring until she stopped it. And it is easier to not talk about the women's featherweight division because there is nothing going on in it. Watching these Bellator shills go, oh, Cyborg needs to leave the UFC and come and fight the real number 2 featherweight in the world. And you're like, well, is she the real number 2 featherweight in the world? Because she's fighting fucking nobody. And I'd pick Holly Holm over her if Holly Holm bothered to fight. If they had 5 rounds for Holly Holm to bother to fight. Might even pick Jermaine Durandamy over her. Though Jermaine Durandamy has she come back? I can't remember if she's fought again yet. No, she hasn't fought since February 2017. But I'm quite glad that I held off, because I was going to record this podcast yesterday, and I was looking down the news, and I was going, whoa, it has been shit this week. Really, the only news up until that point had been Stipe Miocic angling for a rematch with Daniel Cormier, which he deserves, but will never, ever get if they can get the Brock Lesnar thing going. It seems to be the case, like, if you are a fairly competent champion, you get an immediate rematch, or not even a champion for a long time at all, like Cody Garbrandt, immediate rematch with TJ Dillashaw. But Aldo, who deserved an immediate rematch against Conor McGregor because he had fought, 10 title defense, something ridiculous, undefeated in 10 years and fought a ton of title defenses, and then lost through a very quick knockout, which was completely out of character. In fact, him running and swinging was completely out of character. But they were like, no rematch for you, mate. And then Stipe Miocic just now, probably not getting one. But if you followed any of this stuff, you knew that they didn't like Stipe anyway. They were desperate for Ngannou to beat him. And they managed to convince themselves that the punch machine was all that mattered. But Stipe's not the only one desperately clawing for a fight with Daniel Cormier. Everyone from Ilir Latifi, like, why would anyone think that what does Ilir Latifi bring to that fight, aside from a few hardcore fans who liked that picture of him on a horse? He's not an interesting fighter most of the time, and nobody knows his name. Like, why would Daniel Cormier ever take that fight? Even if you thought he was a respectable challenge and tough for Cormier, which he probably isn't, tough challengers with no name value who bring nothing to the matchup anyway are the worst sort of challenges you can take. Far better if you can get this Brock Lesnar thing off the ground, which I will just reiterate is bullshit. They gave him a exemption from the 4-month testing pool on USADA last time, and he still got caught. How shit do you have to be at cycling neuroids? Wait, wasn't it asthma? The number of high-level athletes who have TUEs for asthma and diabetes, get the insulin in, it's quite surprising. Always fun to try and look down lists of people with therapeutic use exemptions. If you've been following the podcast for any length of time, or my work for any length of time, you will know that my 4 least favourite words in the fight game are retroactive therapeutic use exemption. If it's retroactive, you got caught cheating. You didn't ask beforehand, But they'll give you one if they think you can make them enough money. Like Floyd with the IV. The IV was illegal, no question. But because he was going to make them so much money, they were like, oh, it probably wasn't anything. And they gave Cyborg a therapeutic use, a retroactive therapeutic use exemption at one point, didn't they? If it's retroactive, you've already cheated. But even Nick Diaz came out of the works to challenge Daniel Cormier. Nick Diaz, who can't fight wrestlers, hates fighting wrestlers. Scott Coker's biggest breakthrough was, if I don't have Nick fight any wrestlers, he's actually really entertaining, and we can convince people he's the second best welterweight in the world. But he was like, I'll fight Daniel Cormier. What? just what world are you living in? That's a good idea. But Nick Diaz is just a mess nowadays. Someone was claiming that he didn't touch a drop of booze before he met Ronda Rousey, and she just sent him off the rails like Andy Dick. But he has since, driven under the influence and beaten his girlfriend, allegedly. But people are still, on his side, which is really weird. Actually, Nate Diaz teased an announcement 3 weeks ago, and people were like, oh, I'm so excited, and they realised, oh, wait, it's Nate Diaz, he's not going to announce anything. He's just saying, I'll be back in the cage soon, guys. If they give me $10 billion to fight Conor McGregor. The stupidest shit. John Kavanagh's still angling for that third McGregor-Diaz fight. Everyone else is like, yeah, don't really care. Nate Diaz has done nothing in the 2 years since, and Conor McGregor, while he's done something, it's not been that much, and he's still masquerading as the world champion. So I suppose we've got to get him in with Khabib or Tony. Though everyone's forgotten that Tony was the world champion at one point. Someone was telling me that Tony Ferguson was the most overrated fighter in the world the other day, while simultaneously fanboying Khabib Nurmagomedov, and they have almost identical records. They have fought all the same guys. Anyway, yes, so Nick Diaz versus Daniel Cormier. You'd have to be pretty stupid to think that Nick Diaz had a chance in that fight, which is why I reckon Nick Diaz thinks he has a chance in that fight. But yeah, everyone's just been calling out DC. It's been pretty desperate. The other DC Brock Lesnar news was that someone put up a photo of Brock Lesnar's teeth, and they are manky. He has... I presume he grinds his teeth or uses a lot of meth or something. I don't know. Is it MDMA makes you grind your teeth? Mandy. But he has... all the tops of his teeth are missing, and he has fillings inside them. And I didn't even know you could get fillings straight down the middle of your front teeth. It's really weird. They look like someone said dog treats. Someone said old fag ends. Sorry, cigarette butts. We call them fag ends in the UK. But anyway, yeah, Brock Lesnar's teeth are a fucking mess. You should have a look at that. It's absolutely revolting. He must have the worst breath of anyone you've ever met. And that went down a rabbit hole for me, because I was like, yep, well, Brock Lesnar might be the scariest man on the planet, but he hasn't eaten a vegetable in 10 years or 30 years or however long he's been alive. And also his teeth look like this. And I didn't write it and also, I put and. And someone was like, oh, you saying that eating meat makes your teeth look like that? And went on this tirade about how he ate 100% meat for the last 5 years and he feels amazing. Oh, God. And if you haven't, been keeping up, Jordan Peterson, who is just a strange character anyway. People like him because he... tries to reduce everything to logic, and then suddenly he'll start talking about dragons and stuff, and you'll go, wait a minute, Jordan Peterson, are you nuts? But he is now oh, I'm on an entirely carnivorous diet. And there are people who've he said that he did it because he's got autoimmune stuff and it's the only diet that will work. If you have a ton of allergies and shit or stuff like that, and you finally find a diet that can work for you, it doesn't really matter how weird it is, as long as it's alleviating your symptoms and shit like that. But there's this whole subgenre of people who now follow that, partly because of Jordan Peterson, and partly because they want to be I'm a carnivore, rah, oh, I'm a lion. I was saying it's a lot of effort to eat, because if you eat no meat and you do it on a principle, that you don't like animals being kept or killed or whatever for our food. And I love meat. I had a steak last night. I eat chicken most days because I'm trying to make those gains. But that's the thing on principle. If you eat all meat, you are just reducing, and you don't have something that makes it so that it's almost impossible for you to eat vegetables. You are just cutting off half of the things you could eat out of spite. There's no real reason. And also, it's 4 times as expensive. If you buy, not shit chicken breast, compare that to a big piece of organic broccoli or a bag of potatoes. Vegetables are dirt cheap, even organic ones. But there is this whole subset of people who just want to pretend they're lions and trigger vegetarians by telling them that they eat entirely meat. It's absolutely surreal. When the truth is that you are probably going to trigger some vegetarians, but the majority of people just don't care and think, wow, you must take forever to shit. Your Valsalva movement must be very well practiced. Anyway, that's how slow a week it was. I got to talking to people about 100% meat diets and Jordan Peterson, and I work almost exclusively in MMA. Then something amazing happened. Bellator came out. They said welterweight tournament, which they teased a couple of weeks ago, which I don't think I touched on because they only really teased it. But they announced their lineup for the welterweight tournament, and this is, no question for me, the most excited I've been for a tournament since Dream, probably. I mean, if you're talking kickboxing, maybe Glory Last Man Standing, but... I laughed at the Belly tournament, the heavyweight tournament, because unless you're really nostalgic and desperately want to see Fedor Krokop 2 in 2018, there's fuck all in it for you. It's just old men and a couple of young light heavyweights who might do all right. And Chael Sonnen, who has somehow snuck into like that older era, even though he wasn't really part of it. He became famous after that in the UFC. But this tournament is straight up banging, up and down. I'll just quickly read you the names involved. And this was announced by my boy Chamatka Sandhu. I do not know if I'm saying that right, but he gives you all the Bellator news. I think he's an English journalist, is he? I don't know. But I'm often trolling his timeline just to see what ridiculous shit Bellator's up to. It's normally, we're definitely doing Daly versus Page, by the way. Number one surprise, Paul Daly is not in this tournament. But Rory McDonald is. That's the weird part. You've got the champion in the tournament, and that is what they did with the Strikeforce Heavyweight Grand Prix, which I did include when I was saying that I was most excited since Dream. The Strikeforce Heavyweight Grand Prix, they had Overeem in, but that sort of made sense, because while Overeem was the champion, he'd been an absentee champion for like 4 or 5 years. He won it from Paul Buentello and then fucked off to Japan and got huge. But he could have got huge in Strikeforce because they weren't bothering to test. But they put him into the tournament. He was the champion, but if you fought him in the tournament, it wasn't a 5-rounder. You couldn't win the title. And the thinking was, if you got to the end of the tournament, what were you? Were you the heavyweight champion? But then Daniel Cormier, who wasn't even in the first part of the tournament, I think he was a reserve, won the title because that's how won the tournament because that's how tournaments work. And was given a belt that was the Strikeforce Grand Prix belt, which was entirely pointless. Like, that's not something you can defend. It was the sort of problem that they always had with the Pride Grand Prix. As great as the Pride Grand Prix were, you weren't champion if you won it. Like, the champion would be in the tournament, like, say, Dan Henderson, we were talking about the other week, lost to my boy Kazuo Misaki, the Grabaka Hitman, in the first round of the Pride Welterweight tournament. Was that 2005, that's how I'm going to say that from now on. But he remained champion, and I don't know if they gave the winner a title shot or something. Well, they planned to, because it all shut down after that. And that was the other thing with the heavyweight Grand Prix in Strikeforce. It immediately shut down after that, so you didn't get to know if he was going to be the heavyweight champion. But it does sort of give that, what was the point of that whole thing? Whereas I think with it worked a lot better with Pride because it was a 1 or 2 night tournament. I mean, it worked out differently on different nights. The Pride 2000 Grand Prix was all fights same night, and that's probably the most grueling. But that is certainly for Sakuraba, it was the most grueling because he fought 90 minutes against Royce Gracie and then fought 20 minutes against Igor Vovchanchin. But I think that's probably the most exciting kind of tournament. But that makes the tournament a standalone thing. If you win the tournament, that's incredible, because you could not be the best heavyweight in the world or the best fighter in the world in the division in total. If you're each training specifically for one opponent for a couple of months, and then, if that's how the fighting's done, maybe you're not the best at that. But if you win the tournament in one night, that's a feat all of its own, and that probably deserves its own special title, and that wouldn't really matter that you weren't the champion afterwards. If it is taking half the year, the Bellator heavyweight tournament is doing that now. If it's taking half the year to get through all the fights, then there really is no point giving a tournament title for it and not anything to do with the main championship, because if the main champion was involved, then you've just taken half a year out of his schedule as well, So it's interesting. I don't think there is a right way to do it. I'm probably going to write something about tournaments in the week or this, in a couple of days or whatever. But it's weird to think about how they work, because it is a separate thing from the regular rankings, but also if it eats up a lot of time, then it should be involved with the main rankings. But back to this lineup. I mean, it's got Rory McDonald, Michael Page, which means potentially, the other names in this tournament are legitimate fighters, but at any point they could say, I'm expecting them to say Rory McDonald, because they booked Rory McDonald into the fight with Musashi. I presumed that was what he was going to be doing in the meantime, but they've announced him in this tournament, and they've also announced that there's 10 people now, not 8, and they haven't announced one of the participants. So there is every chance that they pull Rory McDonald and Michael Page fights 1 or 2 scrubs and then drops out. So don't get too excited. But looking at the 8 that they announced, it looks like Michael Page has a great chance of fighting someone good. You know, the other guys are Douglas Lima, who is legitimately badass, Lawrence Larkin, who of course is perennial top 10, Ed Ruth, who is an up and comer, but I think he's undefeated at the moment, but he's a good dude. He's probably him and Page are sort of like the untested guys in this tournament. But you've got John Fitch, who obviously has been around a very long time and is very good at what he does. You've got Naaman Gracie, who's another young prospect, but he's been doing great stuff too. And you've got Andrei Koreshkov, who was the champion. Tell me, like, there are people you'd sub out, like, if you could, but tell me that that's a bad lineup, because it isn't. Bellator fans, the victim ones, which are a lot of them, are always like, oh, you shit on Bellator, you never shit on the UFC. I just shit on bad stuff that people do all the time, regardless of company. But this is a really good tournament, and I'm very excited for it to go down. I would love it if it was all in one night. I'd love it if it all unfolded over the course of 3 months. It won't. It'll be dragged out until Bellator probably collapses. But it's looking really good. And if we're just thinking about matchups here, like, I'm going to take Rory McDonald out of it for the moment because I don't think he will actually be in the tournament. But, like, you know, they're trying to get Daly involved, which is part of the reason why they haven't announced a 10th participant in this, because 2 people are going to have to fight to qualify for it's very strange how it's working at the moment, and I think they've got some time to work out the kinks, but Daly is obviously holding it up a bit because he has contract disputes with them. They kept throwing him under the bus regarding Michael Venom Page. He kept fighting top guys. You know, if you look at the guys who fought, I don't know how many of these guys have fought each other. We'll probably work it out in a minute, but there's a lot of guys who are untested, like Michael Page, Ed Ruth, Naaman Gracie. You've got Koreshkov and Lima, who fought each other twice. You've got Larkin and McDonald, who've both fought Lima. Larkin lost to... Well, Paul Daly has fought Larkin, McDonald, and Lima. So he's the guy with all the experience. You know, he only beat one of those guys, but the idea that he was ducking Michael Page has always been laughable to me, because he's fought more of these top guys in Bellator's welterweight division than any of them. Now, the obvious letdown is the not inclusion of Ben Askren. Now, ONE FC is mainly, it seems, a promotion company for Evolve MMA, but you'd think that they'd be able to come to some sort of deal to let Askren fight in this tournament, even if he's still under contract for them. That would be the Ben Askren-shaped cherry on the top of the sundae here. Because imagine, like, Askren versus Page would be hilarious. You've got one guy who can't strike versus one guy who can only strike and hasn't been tested against anyone decent. Lima and Koreshkov would obviously want another go-round with Askren. John Fitch versus Askren could be a hilarious kickboxing match. Or he could just ragdoll John Fitch, which would be incredible. Rory McDonald versus Askren is, of course, the one we all want. Maybe Ben Askren is a massive star for ONE FC. I can't see it personally. I don't know if people were actually turning up to watch Ben Askren crush guys in Muay Thai shorts who'd like won one of their last 3 and were getting a shot at his title. But you put Ben Askren in this tournament, and no matter how boring you think he is, you're tuning in to watch it. Right, I'm back from my cup of tea. I've got my big podcasting mug now. So, needless to say, the Bellator welterweight tournament is one of the more interesting things that's happened in MMA recently. And by recently, I mean the last few years. If it all goes ahead, before Bellator goes under. Because you remember, the reason that some guys like Koreshkov didn't have fights for a while was because Bellator mysteriously stopped giving them fights. Oh, I should mention that the other participants, the bonus participants that they keep tacking on, include people like Amosov. I quite like Amosov, mainly because he wears pink shorts. If you wear pink shorts, you're my boy, automatically. Nice Manto ones. I have to get myself some. Manto, if you're listening, send me pink shorts. Wiki Akio used to wear pink shorts, which was awesome. And the shorts that Lawrence Larkin wears, is it Dark or Dare? It's either a C or an E, but it's weirdly stylized. They're really nice, but that company doesn't actually sell those shorts, which is daft. But that is something that I always remember when I'm watching Bellator. I always think, wow, the quality is much worse generally, except in the highest level matches. But it is so much more interesting to look at. Anyway, we'll quickly recap some of the fights that happened over the weekend from the UFC, and then we'll do some questions and probably get out of here for this week, depending how time looks. Pull up the old Tapology to remind me of what actually happened. Feels like it's been ages. This isn't a particularly... Actually, it is a little bit of a late podcast this week, but it feels much further away than it was. What happened? Jessica Aguilar versus Jodie Esquibel. Do not care. Mark blah, 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 Liz Carmouche, blah, 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 blah. Holy shit, there was a lot of boring fights on this. Justin Scoggins versus Said Nurmagomedov was interesting enough. Scoggins gave up some easy takedowns, but his kicking game looked pretty cool. He was using a side kick into the turnover to the round kick, something that Stephen Thompson really only does against opponents who are in the same stance as him, but Scoggins was doing it from open guard position. There were a couple of occasions where Scoggins changed stances because he clearly wanted to be either on open guard or closed guard or whatever that opened up, and Nurmagomedov would change as well, and then they both changed several times. It was bizarre to watch, but then that's the thing about being a guy who's happy to change stances. You understand that it depends on what stance they're in, and as soon as they change stance, that's what you were thinking about doing out the window, and you try and change back. Alexander Volkanovski versus Darren Elkins. This was the actual main event for anyone who really knew MMA. Alexander Volkanovski burst onto the scene, the UFC scene in 2016, has been looking really good since. Darren Elkins is, of course, top 10 featherweight and just unbreakable. Obviously, he had that fight against Mirsad Bektic where he just got his ass kicked for, was it 3 rounds almost? And then came back at the last minute to win. Elkins, good wrestler, very tough guy, and actually his striking looked weird but cool in this fight. He was hooking off the jab, and he was also using a right uppercut to set up a left body kick, and it actually snuck through a good few times. The right uppercut, very good at stretching the opponent out. So if you want to get to their liver on your left side, you throw the right uppercut, and then you throw the left hook to the liver, or the left uppercut on the inside there. You could use the left knee, but yeah, the difference is with a left kick, it's very tricky because you have to lengthen the uppercut so that you've got space to kick. So you have to throw a long uppercut, and that opens you to counters, and he did get chinned a couple of times because of that. I was saying in my article that, go read the article first of all, because I think Volkanovski's a more interesting prospect than Zabit, to be honest. And people adore Zabit, but I was saying that I think Alexander Gustafsson could benefit from this combination because he really is the prince of the long uppercut. You know, it's a terrible technique, but he uses it very well in terms of it leaving you completely undefended. Volkanovski does a really interesting thing in every fight, which is kickbox along the fence. He's constantly pushing his opponent there. If they come back, he drops back and counters with the right hand. He'll needle them with the left leg, very good with left high kicks and left front kicks. And then if he can press in on the fence, he looks for normally an outside trip or an inside reap, stepping deep inside and landing in closed guard. Sometimes he drops on the takedown, but a lot of the time, like if you can hold a dude down like Jeremy Kennedy, was it Jeremy Kennedy? Yeah, he held him down, beat him up, no problems. But Elkins is obviously a very tough guy to get down, so he's mainly hitting him on breaks, so he'd attempt the outside trip. Elkins would scramble to stick his foot out and keep his balance, and then Volkanovski would try and take his head off with a knee or an elbow. Volkanovski very good at freeing his arms, posting the head, and spinning for the back elbow. Does that all the time. Sent Elkins down with a spinning back fist that missed because Elkins was leaning to avoid it and fell to his knees, well, to his side when it came. Also tries to crack people with the right hook as they circle out, which he dropped Hirota with, which was a really good performance for him. Very interesting fighter. I think he's 5'6", so he's about the same height as Chad Mendes claims to be. No, it's about the same height as Chad Mendes. I think, to be honest, when I think of bad matchups for Volkanovski stylistically, I think the worst ones are the shorter guys in the division. I think Frankie Edgar and Chad Mendes, because they're such strong wrestlers, match up very well with him. Obviously, Edgar works well in combinations and then stepping out the side. Chad Mendes likes you to walk onto him so that he can chin you with the overhand, and then the left hook following up as he did against Miles Jury later in the same night. I do like Volkanovski versus Yair because he's so good at pushing people to the fence, and Yair struggled so much against the fence. Zabit in his last fight was really not looking very crafty with his ring craft. he's got kicks and shit, and he will throw the jab, but he threw the same jab pivoting off over and over again, and that's the sort of stuff that a guy who's good at pressuring will crack you over the top with the right hand, or start body kicking you on the same side, or kicking into the back of that leg, always available when someone pivots out that way. Very interested to see where Volkanovski goes in the future. Perez versus Wineland, I barely remember, even though I love Eddie Wineland. Katzengano versus Marion Renault. It was nice to see Katzengano finally get a win, but she was ranked at number 7 in the world, having not won a fight since 2015. How bad is the women's bantamweight division? We talk about how bad the featherweight division is, but Jesus Christ. Chad Mendes comes back after, 2 years off, and easily starts his Miles Jury. Same stuff as always. He's never really looked as good as he did against Aldo. I thought, that was the most complete Chad Mendes we've seen, the second time round, that is. A lot of what he does is just sort of back up and either try and duck in on the shot as the opponent steps in, or run in swinging punches. And against guys like Aldo, that really telegraphed his takedowns, because he knew if he moved at him, he was going to shoot on you or throw the overhand. I think if he fought a little bit more like Volkanovski, that would really suit him. I mean, he doesn't really have the kicking game as much, but, Volkanovski sets up the counter right hand by putting people near the fence. Chad Mendes would be able to shoot into people on the fence and wrestle from there. And, of course, that level change into the uppercut, which is a Chad Mendes favourite, but he does it wide out in the open. Justin Gaethje does that a lot along the fence, and it forces the opponent to drop their weight and square up, because they don't have anywhere to retreat or throw their legs back behind them. So you really have a better chance of landing the uppercut. Nico Price versus Randy Brown was a weird fight. I didn't really think much of it until suddenly Nico Price is on the bottom. He was almost like looking for a knee bar and then didn't quite get to it, and then he had his left foot underneath Brown's head, his shin across his neck, and hammer-fisted Brown as Brown was sort of turning around and knocked him out. And again, after that, people were like, whoa, he's got crazy power from everywhere. But really, that's more that, exactly the same thing we talked about with Stipe or whatever. You can take big punches when you see him coming and when you know the guy's swinging, but nobody expects to take a big hit when the guy's on the bottom, or to take a solid hit when the guy's on the bottom, and you're sort of scrambling through what looked like almost a passing position. Got caught off guard, got knocked out. Very strange, but I've seen dudes knocked out in the top of mountain like that. There was that guy who fought Halleck Gracie back in the day. He knocked a guy out who was mounted on him just because he didn't expect his chin to get tapped from there, because you're told you're unhittable from mount, basically. Sage Northcutt versus Zach Otto. Sage Northcutt remains one of the most not overpaid. I mean, everyone's underpaid in this sport, but overvalued talents by the UFC. But he is getting better, so good for him. His striking has always been pretty poor, in my opinion. He does the stepping right hand to left, stepping straights like Stephen Thompson or someone like that, but he does it very slowly and then gets boxed up in the aftermath. Brian Barberena and people like that were landing good counters on him because his striking is very herky-jerky, karate-like, and predictable. He does a lot of lead leg kicking and then gets that parried and easily taken down. Who was it did that? Was it Cody the Sister Fister? But yeah, he got chinned with the right hand really early on in this one, taken down, survived the first round, comes back round 2, and then he flurried really well. His hands looked good, actually, when he was in range to throw him. He didn't really have a guard, and he was still sort of exposing himself, but they looked quick and powerful. And then he knocked down Zach Otto. Otto chased a takedown and then got hammer-fisted when he was down on a low single, and just the ref waved it off. But good on Sage Northcutt for coming back from adversity there. He's a guy who had very, very high hopes on him and then proved not to be like the next John Jones or someone like that. But there's nothing stopping him from getting much, much better. And I think he's moved to Team Alpha Male now, and they're supposed to be doing well there. Famously, his strange dad sort of kept him from training with top teams full time. But yeah, if he sorts that out, gets out from, under the wing of his strange father and gets a proper, a couple of proper coaches telling him what to do, no reason he can't be good. And then Junior Dos Santos versus Blagoy Ivanov. Basically what we said it would be last week. Ivanov stood along the fence, got punched a lot. Later rounds came forward a bit, just taking the blows on the face and countering. Dos Santos' face gets really swollen up any time he takes a punch. Ivanov looked tough, but that was about it. And Junior Dos Santos landed his usual punches, but didn't look like anything special. So, I didn't bother writing about it because it wasn't very interesting. And, if you get a tune-up and you don't smash them, it's really not going to make much news, to be honest. And then there were a couple of Bellator events which I did watch but didn't really care about. Got to watch Gabriel Varga fight, which is always fun, and Giorgio Petrosian back in action against a world-class talent. Number 3 in the world, what's his name, Alazov? I think he was in K1 for a while and was their champion, but that was a good, fun fight. I found watching it difficult for a start, because where are you going to watch Bellator kickboxing, especially in the UK? But I found when I was watching it, they kept Mike Goldberg and Big John on the commentary for the Petrosian fight and the kickboxing, and it was really, we joke about how bad Goldie is on the MMA, but I expect him there, And once he was in the kickboxing environment, it was very clear that he doesn't actually pay attention to the fights and just reads the person's life story off a Wikipedia page printed in front of him. In the first round, there were a couple of nice exchanges going on. There was stuff going on all the time in this fight. It was actually pretty high pace for a Petrosian fight, and Alazov was making a fight of it. Every time Petrosian threw, he was throwing back. Every time he threw, Petrosian was throwing back. So it was a good paced fight. Mike Goldberg goes off for a minute and a half telling you about how Giorgio Petrosian walked into a gym when he was 13 or something and was told he was too skinny, and then he became one of the best boxers in the kickboxers in the world, and he won in K1 and blah blah blah. Talk about the fucking fight. And then at the end of it, this minute and a half anecdote, Big John goes, well, you know what they say about the dog in the fight? And Goldberg goes, oh, they say it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the fight in the dog. And then John goes, it's the fight in the dog. And they just laugh aimlessly at each other. And 2.5 minutes have passed since they started this bollocks. So the whole round was just them talking bollocks. And then the rest of the fight was largely them talking bollocks too. They were really, really bad. I like John McCarthy. Don't care for Goldberg, but they were both really bad on this card. But yeah, good to see Giorgio Petrosian back in action against a world-class talent. Fair play to Bellator Kickboxing getting whoever it was, K1's champion, over. They have Raymond Daniels. They have Giorgio Petrosian. The problem is, where the fuck do you watch Bellator Kickboxing? I have to, find sketchy links for it, because I don't think they broadcast anywhere in the UK. And if they do, it's 2 weeks later. They've got all this good talent. Scott Coker comes from kickboxing, so he obviously likes kickboxing. He was constantly trying to push Joe Schilling down our throats, even though he was only an okay kickboxer and not a good MMA fighter. Why is it so hard to watch? If Viacom aren't giving you the push, get it put online. Some of these, Gabriel Varga and Giorgio Petrosian, I would pay $5, $10 to watch that card. Streaming. But who knows the mind of the Viacom executives, to be honest. Anyway, let's do some questions. Hi Jack, I don't have a long rhyming name for you, but I was thinking about how if you ever invented a new type of back control, you would call it the Jack Slack human backpack. My question, what advice would you give when fighting someone who utilises a teep and round kicks to keep me back extremely well? I'm usually the shorter fighter, so when I try to move forward, I get the teep in the gut, and when I try to move in one side or the other, I walk right into the round kick. Is it a matter of feinting one direction and moving the other way, or are there some non-movement based deceptions to use to get in on my opponent? My second question is, how would you corner/game plan for a boxer/kickboxer who has pretty slow reaction speed? Let's assume you have 3 to 4 months before fight night and that the person is in the 25th percentile of reaction speed out of all fighters. His opponent is relatively same height, skill, and athleticism. What techniques or strategies would you drill into your fighter? Thanks for taking time to answer these questions. I really love the podcast and the articles. Every fight card, I get this sudden hankering for a hot cup of Twinings. Cheers, Dennis. P.S. Are there any plans for Jack Slack merch? Additionally, we all hate the ring and we all hate the chain link fence, so why not have a pit with padded walls that spectators can look down into? Not those idiotic sloped walls like the Yama pit. This would eliminate anyone falling through the ropes or anyone grabbing the cage, and everyone has an unobstructed view of the action. Right, cheers, Dennis. A lot to unpack there. The Jack Slack human backpack, I like that. It would probably come off a butt drag. On the subject of merch, yes, we have some t-shirts in the works, which we'll have out soon. We've actually been designing them for ages, but yeah, I think they'll be fun. One of them is Black Explosive, Master of the 52, so you'll enjoy that. And then the other one, what is the other one? Fuck, Can't remember off the top of my head, but we've got a couple. And then we'll probably do a Bin Man Caught These Hands t-shirt at some point with the little Jack Slack logo on the back or low on the front, so that you don't want it massive there, being like, hey, Jack Slack's t-shirt. You want something clever, and then a little Jack Slack logo down the bottom is what I was thinking. Or that's what we're working on at the moment. So we'll have those up on either like Cotton Bureau, Teespring, something like that. Redbubble notoriously don't care about copyright. Right, in regard to getting teeped and round kicked when walking in, I think take it back and reverse engineer it. The guy is trying to teep or round kick you when you walk in, which means he's trying to time you. The way to beat someone trying to time you is to make them think that you're moving in and then not move in, or move in when they don't think you're moving in. So you've got to find some way to fake stepping in, whether that's be pumping the shoulder feint with the jab, or whether that's picking up the lead leg as if you're going to glide in behind the knee or a teep. I really like gliding in behind the high knee. There was Brutus Beefcake's finisher when he was the booty man, the high knee. But I like gliding in behind the high left knee, which you can do quite lazily, but it's nice to have it out there jamming. That's an old competition karate style trick. There was a whole section in Masahiko Tanaka's book about jamming with the knee. If you lift it up across your body in the style of a cross check, you can also take away half his kicks. You take away all the straight kicks and the kicks from your left side, which is the hardest one to deal with when someone's timing it on you stepping in. And then you can land with the right hand when you come down from the kick. So lots of fake pick up the leg to glide in, lots of fake stepping in, and definitely don't be, I would say, make sure you capitalize if you do get them half kicking. When someone half does a counter and they realize you're not stepping in, the moment that they've done that, they have opened themselves up and they're heading back to their guard, and it's while they're in that returning to guard motion that you really want to be stepping in. So fake and then step in, and that's the sort of stuff that can really throw people off. Alternatively, you can fake and try and catch the kicks and then drag the leg across you and step in behind that. Catching the left leg, dragging it across you and leaping in with the left hook is a favourite of mine. Or catching the right leg, dragging it across you and then stepping in with a switch left high kick. It also works really well against orthodox fighters, but just go into the open side with the high kick would be my advice on that. In regards to low reaction time, if it's the same person they're dealing with, if you're dealing with the kicks and stuff, then you're really going to find it much easier to do the fake step in and their actual step in. But if they have a slow reaction time, something you can really take advantage of is single shot pot shotting, because you can go, let's use an example from Gino Dos Santos: body jab, crouch down a little bit as if to body jab, and then throw a wide sort of whipping left hook over the top. That's something that you're encouraging them to react one way, and you're changing, the path is the preliminary movement. All your hips and shoulders is exactly the same. It's only the arm whipping out, which is the tell on that being a left hook rather than a left straight. So that sort of stuff works. Also, like double hand fighting into like left hook, right straight, the Daniel Cormier sort of stuff. If they have slow reaction times, that can really piss people off. You don't have to land big punches around the guard, but you can land just little slappy ones and have them moving their hands around awkwardly. The pit. I think some of it is to do with stadium design, because you're playing to either, not massive stadiums and arenas, but you're playing to, like the MEN, like the MEN in Manchester, the last one is that the last one I went to? It's the last one I remember off the top of my head, but you want to have the fighters on floor level, and you don't want things obstructing the view of them. The problem with a pit is that, we all hate the chain link fence and the ropes, but the reason that they're used is because they're relatively see-through. You can look through them. Once you get the sides of a pit, that's something that's, when the fighters are below that, it's obscuring your view of them. And I know you wouldn't have a very low pit, but it's got to be low enough that they're not being bent over the top of it and forced out. So yeah, it's tricky. It's nobody's really found a better way to do it. If it was an entirely televised event and it wasn't a stadium show or an arena show, you could use wall pads, like they have at jiu-jitsu academies. You just pad up 4 walls and then shut the door and televise the whole thing with cameras from inside. But unfortunately, a lot of the money on these things comes from ticket sales. So no one's found a better way yet. But I'm sure strange Asian companies will continue to experiment, and weird American companies founded by people who think that they're entrepreneurs. Anyway, cheers, Dennis. Hey, Jack, been your boy since 2012 when I read your GSP safety lead article on Bloody Elbow. God, that's a long time ago. Your articles and videos on the fight game are top-notch. I know how highly you rate Archie Moore and his cross-arm guard, and all the mythical 52 jokes aside, I was wondering how effective you think a cross-arm guard would be in a Southpaw versus Orthodox matchup. We all know in MMA, putting on the 4-ounce earmuffs isn't very good, isn't very defensively sound, and that in an open stance engagement, you can't simply get behind your opponent's lead shoulder for the opponent's rear hand. Would a cross-arm guard fill that deflecting gap, for open stance fighters when dealing with rear hands? Cheers from America, David. The tricky thing, I don't like cross guard for open stance engagements because the lead knees getting in the way of each other prevents the infighting sort of position, or like mid-range position, where the cross guard really comes into its own. And if you are out of range the entire time, you're dealing with kicks more, which is bad for the cross guard. And also, in the open stance scenario, everyone's favourite thing that they know is that they can land their power kick on that open side. And if you've got the cross guard, your elbow is away from your side for that. Unless you're, keeping it tight until you move into fighting range or mid-range and then crossing. So it's tricky. I can't remember watching Archie Moore fight any southpaws, to be honest. But yeah, Archie Moore's crossguard, the whole thing was to trick people into getting close enough to left hook with. And sometimes that would involve, like, walking through someone's jabs and really pushing in. And other times they would come to him and throw the right hand at him. I think the southpaw situation, especially when kicks are allowed and knees, really complicates things because if you're fighting a southpaw, that right elbow is the one that's high when you square up. That's not to say you can't do it. I'm sure there are fighters who have had great success in boxing against southpaws with the cross guard. I just haven't actually seen them yet. Or maybe I haven't forgotten them. Who knows? Cheers, David. Dear Royal Highness of Fisticuffs. Oh, that's me. Duke of Who the Fuck, Earl of Hitting Like a Girl, and the Baron of Swearing. Oh, that's a stretched one. Jack Slack. My question for the podcast today is about stance and how best to apply it to both open and closed guard matchups. Oh, this is similar to the last question, but similar-ish. Is it better to focus on training on just one stance and to practice adjusting your tools and tactics depending on the type of engagement, open or closed? Or should you train both stances in order to give yourself the ability to dictate the stance dynamic? Thanks, as always. Keep up the brilliant work. From Scott. I would say, I work... If I were hurt, I'd go to my orthodox stance because that's the one I really know how to do everything out of. And I think, that's to do with what you fall back on naturally. If I were in a heated debate with someone down the club, I would find my left foot my right foot going back behind me. And then the other one, then I'd run. But I think you got to try and build up a more comprehensive game from your natural stance, and I would say use the switching of stances to set up specific openings. I don't believe that anyone fights from both stances as well as they do from, there's no one who's ambidextrous in their stances. There's always going to be weaknesses on one side and things you can do better on one side than the other. So I prefer to look at it as an offensive choice. So you're using your footwork to stay out of range and dictate their opportunities while using the switching of stances to set stuff up. Once you get into switching stances on the inside, that's really sort of weird territory, like Marvin Hagler stuff. And that's partly what confused people against him. But, Hagler mainly was southpaw on the outside and then went orthodox when he was inside because he swung his right hand better, and that's just what he naturally went to. I think the thing is that, if you focus on getting defensively sound from your natural stance, that's doable. Whereas it's a very daunting task to try and learn everything everything defensively from both stances. I'd say use stance switching as an offensive move and a gimmick. Well, not a gimmick, but an offensive thing. And try not to get caught in your off stance. But that's just me. I'm sure there are people out there who can manage to round out both stances and use them well under pressure. But not, ambidextrously well, is what I was saying earlier. So yeah, anyway, cheers, Scott. I hope that helps a little bit. But, again, you're going to have to make your own decisions on that one. Anyway, I reckon that'll do us for this week. Maybe we'll do a little bit more later in the week. For the fights this weekend are kind of shit, let's be honest. I mean, you got Shogun versus Anthony Smith. Anthony Smith's about to go on like a streak of just knocking out people who you're sad are still fighting. Or Shogun wins a boring decision again. And then you got Glover Teixeira versus... It was Latifi? Who's it now? Oh, Beast in 2029-8 or whatever it is. Corey Anderson. Yeah, so very little to give a fuck about there, but, I will continue writing. I'll find something interesting to write about. I might write something about tournaments tomorrow. I've also got some Israel Adesanya stuff that I've just been had on the back burner for a little while. Didn't want to put it out last week because he said nice things about me on Rogan. Yeah, so if you want to get in on the history episodes, we're going to be doing something on the early K1s this week, and then next month we'll be moving into Chinese history stuff because I'm having such a whale of a time researching it through the frame of the British Empire and the East India Company. That was the dream job, thugging in foreign lands with government backing. I believe I can't remember if Notorious is out in Ireland or everywhere yet. I'll have to talk to my editor. I think he's on holiday at the moment. But yeah, I wrote a book. You can get that. There's also Finding the Art, which I wrote ages ago, and I think I'm gonna write another one soon, and I'll have a red cover for that, and we'll have the blue book, the red book, and keep going like that. Let me know what you think about merch. I think Black Explosive Master of the 52 is looking really good. I quite like it. Well, I very much like it. I think you're going to love that. But yeah, tell me what t-shirts you would wear. And Black Explosive Master of the 52 is pretty tasteful, I'll just say, because I didn't want people walking around with a knockout game me sort of t-shirt. But yeah, let me know what you'd like merch-wise and if you'd wear it. And all my work goes up on fightprimer.com, so go bookmark that or whatever. I'm Jack Slack, and I'll catch you next week. Cheers. Connor bless.